The Chicago Bears preseason is over, and the 53-man roster cutdown will begin this weekend. We'll put together a roster prediction of who's in, who's out, and how this Bears win over the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday night will shape the final roster.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can get a free 3-week trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV when you bet $5 on anything. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we predict this Bears 53-man roster as the cutdowns start coming in over the course of the weekend. The deadline officially Tuesday afternoon, but the Bears won't wait until Tuesday to submit all their moves. They might wait till the end for most of them, but we'll start to get the initial cuts, and so we want to be ahead of the game here on who will make it and who won't. We'll look at both sides of the ball, so some easy cuts to make, some more difficult ones we'll need to talk through, and then we'll turn our attention to where the Bears likely will still add to their 53. They'll submit a 53-man roster on Tuesday. Then they'll add one or two or more players that were cut from other teams, waiver claims and other free agent signings, and then make even more changes to their 53-man roster after that. So we'll look at where those changes could still come after the initial 53 of the players who made the team. Let's take a look at how this Chiefs game on Thursday will particularly influence this. When we saw Larry Borom get carted off with I believe they called it an ankle injury. That could be his way off of this 53-man roster, going on injured reserve or taking an injury settlement, and the Bears could save some salary cap space with that. You saw Velus Jones have a really strong game as a running back in the backfield. That could be his ticket onto the roster. We saw DeAndre Carter let a punt get muffed and turn into a turnover. Could that take his spot? Plus, Reddy Stewart had a couple of big plays, a couple of big interceptions, including a pick six. Could he have played his way onto the 53-man roster? Let's look big picture at where this 91-man roster stands. Because right now, Tory Taylor counts as an exemption for being an international player. So he doesn't count towards the 90, but he will count towards the 53 when the Bears do decide to keep him on the 53-man roster, obviously. And so with 90 players, you've got a certain amount of easy, obvious decisions here. And I'll just include special teams in here right now because they're not going to keep two punters, so Corliss Waitman is gone, and they're not going to keep two long snappers, so Cameron Lyons is gone. They'll keep Cairo Santos, Tory Taylor, and Patrick Scales. Those will be your three special teams players. You can cut the extra punter and the extra long snapper and get you down to 89. All right, easy stuff to get started here. Let's jump in at quarterback then, where undrafted rookie free agent Austin Reed had a nice touchdown pass against the Chiefs, but he's destined for the practice squad at best this season. Is not making the 53-man roster. They're not going to keep four quarterbacks, and I think at this point, they're not likely to keep three quarterbacks on the 53-man roster just yet. The Bears can put Austin Reed or Brett Rypien on the practice squad and call them up as the emergency third quarterback if they need to on a game week. So there's not a ton of value in keeping him on your 53-man roster in that exact same spot. He's not going to count towards that. So it's going to be Caleb Williams and Tyson Bagent, and a third quarterback doesn't come on unless there's an injury to one of them at some point in the season. So easy decisions so far. Some special teamers and some quarterbacks. We're at 87, so we still have 34 players to cut down here. Running back position gets interesting. Undrafted rookie running back Ian Wheeler played well this preseason, but also got banged up a little bit in this final preseason game. practice squad candidate, but not going to make this 53-man roster. So then it comes down to, do they keep 3 running backs or 4 with DeAndre Swift, Khalil Herbert, and Roschon Johnson for sure? Do they keep just the 3 of them and cut both Travis Homer and Velus Jones? Do they keep just Velus Jones? Did he show enough at running back? Or do you count Velus Jones as a wide receiver and keep Travis Homer as the 4th running back? We heard Matt Eberflus say after the game against the Chiefs, he was asked, why didn't Velus Jones do any kickoff returns in this game? And he said, well, we've seen enough from Velus Jones. We're comfortable with where he is, so we wanted to see some other guys back there. That tells me that he is going to make this 53-man roster. And I think they gave him all that extra run because they wanted him to get more experience and see what he could do, and he certainly took advantage of it and looked really good with a couple of those nice runs, a big touchdown as well in there. So Velus Jones is going to make this 53-man roster, and I think Travis Homer might not. If we're going through a prediction here, I'm going to predict Travis Homer gets cut here, but he's definitely one of those guys that's definitely like lingering on the fringe here. If Velus Jones counts as part running back, part wide receiver, I could see Travis Homer still sticking around in this roster, and that's one we may circle back around to if we get down to the end of the cutdowns here. Wide receivers. We know, we'll count Curry Blasingame at fullback. Okay, so we're at 85. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, Tyler Scott. Your top 4 receivers are all locked in. I think Dante Pettis is pretty clearly your number 5 wide receiver right now, and DeAndre Carter feels like number 6 if we're not counting Velus Jones in with the wide receivers at this point. And I think Colin Johnson's going to the practice squad. Pierre LeBlanc might be a practice squad guy. John Jackson cut. And Simba Webster has made some nice waves this preseason, but I don't think he's going to make your 53-man roster either. So I think it's 6 wide receivers, Moore, Allen, Odunze, Scott, Pettis, and then Carter. Tight end is a difficult one because I don't know if they keep 3 or 4, given how much Shane Waldron is going to use multiple tight ends on the field. They might just keep 4 to have 4 around. I think you'll keep at least 1 on the practice squad, but I don't think Brendan Bates or Tommy Sweeney are quite in the mix there. I think it's probably Steven Carlson as maybe the number 4 tight end in that mix. We'll leave him on there for now, and if we come back, and I'll throw Travis Homer back in as we walk through this exercise for the count. And then when we get to the very end, we'll have to make a tight cut down in there. But for now, we'll leave them in there. Offensive line, real quick, as we wrap up the offense here before we turn our attention to the defense. You've got Braxton Jones, Darnell Wright at tackle, plus Karan Amagaji is now healthy, so presumably he's going to make your 53-man roster. I wondered if they'd try and stash him on injured reserve, but he's healthy enough for now, so he's going to make this team. Larry Borum was carted off with an ankle injury against the Chiefs. I thought he was a lock to make this 53-man roster when healthy, but all of a sudden an injury throws a pretty big wrench in here. And I really don't know. Do they trust Karan Amagaji to be their top swing tackle? Like if Braxton Jones gets hurt week 1 against the Titans, do they feel comfortable throwing a rookie 3rd-round pick from Yale in on the field after having not played at all in the preseason? I feel like the answer is no. I feel like they're going to need to add something at offensive tackle if Larry Borum is going to be hurt and out. Certainly I don't think, Aviante Collins at the end of that depth chart's not going to make it. I think Larry Borum's going to end up injured reserve or waived injury settlement based on the injury thing here. I just don't know that they're going to keep him lingering around if this ankle injury is going to keep him out for a little while. I think all of a sudden in that Chiefs game, he went from on the roster to off the roster based purely on that injury, which just leaves Jake Curhan, the backup right tackle, as the only other offensive tackle you might consider keeping here. Although they did try Jatari Carter at left tackle a little bit in the preseason, but Carter very clearly fell down this depth chart. Theo Bennett's obviously going to be audit guard. And Bill Murray started this last preseason game ahead of Jatari Carter. So I don't feel like either one of them is going to make this 53-man roster. I think Matt Pryor is going to be your top backup guard, plus Ryan Bates can play some backup guard as well. So I think Pryor is going to be your 3rd guard, and he makes the team, and then Bates is going to be your backup center as well. So I think offensively, on the offensive line, right now, because of Karan Amagaji coming back slow, I'm going to leave him with 9, with Jake Curhan as your 9th offensive lineman, your 4th offensive tackle. But otherwise, as a whole, you've got an offense of 27 players that we've cut down to here so far, leaving Travis Homer as the 5th running back and Steven Carlson as the 4th tight end, because we can come back to that later. If we need to make a cut, those are the guys who are sitting here right on the fringe. But we'll plow through some of the top players on defense that most likely aren't going to make this 53-man roster. See how close we get to 53, and then make those like neck and neck final decisions as we wrap up our prediction next. on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. I do online therapy every single week, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and that's why I recommend BetterHelp, because self-care is really important, and we need to have these types of non-negotiables built into our schedule, that we make time for going to therapy, because we make so much time for everyone else in our lives. Kid activities, work projects, so many things on our schedule, and it's easy to let your priorities slip. But when you make time for therapy and for self-care, that's how you can not only be your best self for you, but also be there for all the different people in your life. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try, and just make sure you never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon to get 10% off. This Bears defense is so established already that I don't think there's a lot of space to battle here as far as who's going to make the roster here or there. The defense feels a little bit easier to trim down because you don't have like the Larry Borum injury question and the Velus Jones, which position does he count at questions. It's really just a matter of how many defensive linemen they choose to keep, and then special teams wise, how many linebackers, you keep an extra linebacker versus an extra safety versus an extra cornerback. That's the only other area I think we might run into a few different things going through the defense. So like if we start with the defensive end position and the defensive line as a whole, we kind of know Montez Sweat, DeMarcus Walker, Austin Booker are your 1, 2, and your 3. Dominique Robinson has clearly been number 4, and then Daniel Hardy has been right in there at number 5 at defensive end. But no Khalid Kareem, no Jamri Chroma for sure. We thought Jake Martin would be the Bears' 3rd defensive end when the Bears signed him this offseason, but he didn't play at all in the preseason, has been hurt for most of it. I would expect injured reserve or waived injured for him. So it's a matter now, do you keep 4 defensive ends or do you keep Daniel Hardy as a 5th defensive end? We'll leave him on for now and see as we keep cutting down when we need to make that type of a change. Defensive tackle, I think, is really straightforward. Billings, Dexter Pickens, and then right now Byron Cowart is your number 4, and no one else has really made a strong play for that. I predict they will add another defensive tackle. Spoiler alert, we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast, but like that position is definitely not settled at this point. Matt Eberflus said as much basically after the Chiefs game. Like, yeah, he's got some concerns about the depth there that they still need to add, but like defensive line, pretty quick and easy to cut down there. It's just a question of, does Hardy stick as the 5th defensive end, or do they only go with 4 defensive ends and keep an extra player somewhere else? We'll see as we keep cutting some things down here. Linebacker, similar conversation. The guys at the bottom of the roster don't stand a chance. Javen White, Carl Jones, Paul Moala. If you watched the 4th quarter of the preseason game against the Chiefs, more power to you. You would have heard those names, but otherwise not names we've heard a lot of this preseason. And then it's the other 6 linebackers. Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards, Jack Sanborn, Noah Sewell, Amin Ogbongbemiga, and then Micah Baskerville, who was an undrafted free agent last year. Baskerville's definitely last on that list, and it's a question, again, you keep 5 linebackers or 6? We'll stick with 6 for now, but we're going to get to this point where, okay, we've kept an extra player at running back, at tight end, at defensive end, at offensive tackle, and at linebacker. We're going to have to make some tough decisions on a few of those guys. But we'll circle back to that when we absolutely need to. Cornerback, Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, Terrell Smith, 1, 2, 3, 4, locked in. I still think Jalen Jones is your 5, and Josh Blackwell has had really strong preseason as your 6. Greg Stroman would be your 7th choice, but like Leon Jones and Ro Torrance won't make it. Reddy Stewart had a really strong preseason, but I don't think there was almost nothing he could do on the field defensively that was going to make this 53-man roster, but he very clearly earned a practice squad spot and gives you a lot to be excited about. I think they played him a little bit at safety in this game. It looked like he was lined up deep a couple of times as well, so something to look into there moving forward. So we'll take him out. We'll leave 7 corners for now, but they're not going to keep 7. I think Stroman may end up being my odd man out, but again, we'll finish up with the safeties and then make our difficult cuts here. Douglas Coleman was carted off with a really serious injury, taken to the hospital against the Chiefs. Feel really bad for him. Hope everything is fine. He was moving appendages. Sounds like he's going to be all right, but like that's he wasn't going to make the 53-man roster anyway, but like tough way to have to cut him after that. You feel extra bad about it. Same thing with, well, not same thing, but Quindell Johnson at safety also definitely going to be a cut there. Tarvarius Moore and Adrian Colbert were both having some decent plays this preseason. Moore, not as much so. Colbert's definitely the fifth safety here. Made a nice diving pass breakup in this game. But we know your starters are Byard and Brisker. Your backups are Hicks and Owens. And then Colbert would be safety number 5. So as we've cut down all the more easier decisions here at this point. And I'm at 57 players. So I need to cut 4 more. And I see my extra players, my cuttable players here, as Travis Homer at running back, Steven Carlson at tight end, Jake Curhan at offensive tackle, Daniel Hardy at defensive end, Micah Baskerville at linebacker, Greg Stroman at cornerback, and Adrian Colbert at safety. That's 7 players. I need to cut 4 of them. As it stands right now, I have 27 on offense, and I have 27 on defense, and 3 on special teams. So pretty well balanced. Means I'm probably going to need to cut at least somebody from both sides here. And I think, first of all, I don't think the Bears are going to keep 7 cornerbacks. So I'm going to cut Greg Stroman here. But I think between Stroman and Jones and Blackwell, that's a spot where we could easily be surprised and have someone miss the roster that we thought would make it, or make the roster that we thought would miss it. And that to me is tough, but I'm going to cut Stroman. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was Jalen Jones. I do think Blackwell has really played well, and it offers a lot of special teams value there, and I think Stroman's going to be the one who ends up getting cut. So 3 more. Did that keep 5 defensive ends and 6 linebackers? Probably not. I think for now, given that DeMarcus Walker is going to play a lot of defensive tackle and rotate inside there, Sweat will rotate inside sometimes, even Dominic Robinson could rotate inside. If your ends are going to play a little more tackle, I'm going to keep an extra defensive end because you're kind of spreading out the depth there across the defensive line. I'm going to keep 9 defensive linemen, knowing that some of my ends are going to play some tackle, and I need some extra depth then at the end if you're going to be using more ends. So I'm going to keep Daniel Hardy, but I think I'm going to cut Micah Baskerville. You can get him on the practice squad pretty easily. The Bears usually only use 2 linebackers for the majority of the game, and Baskerville can hang around in the practice squad. So we're at 55 now, and I still have a 5th safety in Adrian Colbert. I have a 5th running back in Travis Homer, a 4th tight end in Steven Carlson, and a 4th offensive tackle in Jake Curhan. This one's tricky for me. This is where I think I'm most stuck. Because Adrian Colbert's been very good on special teams and has flashed some plays on defense. Jake Curhan gives me offensive tackle depth that's important. They're going to use a lot of tight ends, and Velus Jones is going to play some wide receiver and be a return man. Travis Homer's a good special teams player. This is where I'm really struggling the most here. I do think I've just taken 2 guys off of defense. I got to take somebody off offense. It's not going to be that unbalanced. And man, at this point, Jake Curhan spent his entire preseason playing right tackle. And I don't know that he has much, if any, left tackle experience in his career. He's played some guard, but you don't really have a true backup left tackle other than Karan Amagashi at that point. Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright are healthy. And Karan Amagashi is supposed to be too. So I do think we'll talk about the offensive line, but I don't think Jake Curhan's going to make this 53-man roster. And that puts me at 54. And then I'm stuck between Steven Carlson, Travis Homer, and Adrian Colbert. One's got to go. And all 3 are going to be special teams guys. Boy, it feels to me like both 5 running backs and 5 safeties feels like too much. But gosh, it's hard to leave too many at either spot. I'd like to kind of cut both of them in a weird way. I think if I'm trying to predict most accurately what the Bears do here, boy, it feels like Travis Homer is more likely to make the 53-man roster than Adrian Colbert. It's just hard to picture them carrying 5 running backs into the regular season. But I'm gonna go Adrian Colbert as my cut there and get me down to 53-man roster, even though that's now 24 on offense compared to 26 on offense compared to 24 on defense. But that's the way the cookie crumbles for this initial 53-man roster. Keyword there, initial, because even if this is the 53-man group that they take into Wednesday, in towards week 1, it's not going to be the 53-man group that takes the field week 1 against the Tennessee Titans. More changes are going to come to this roster after the Bears make their initial cuts. And we'll look at the spots that seem most ripe for the change next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because they have the tools to find the right candidates for your team faster and for free. I'm on LinkedIn. I bet you're on LinkedIn. And if you're not, that's okay. A lot of your friends, family members, and coworkers are all part of LinkedIn. And that's why LinkedIn isn't just a job board. It's not like your other options here. LinkedIn helps you hire other professionals that you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but hey, they might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. A few players will make it through the Chicago Bears 53-man roster cutdown, thinking that they've made it, they're on the team, they're going to be a Chicago Bear this regular season, only to have their hopes dashed sometime over the next, 48 to 72 hours usually after the cutdown days, when you made the first wave, but you didn't make the second wave. Because undoubtedly, the Bears will pursue a number of players to still try and add to their 53-man roster that weren't with the team during training camp and the preseason. And when the cuts start coming in, we'll go through some of the top candidates the Bears should try to poach here on the Locked On Bears podcast. But of course, that hasn't happened yet as we're recording this. But I think there's a few positions in particular that stand out as like, oh yeah, the Bears are probably, will at least look at adding something here. And if a good player is cut, they absolutely will add something. For example, I think on the offensive line, given the injuries to Larry Borum in this Chiefs game, if he's going to miss time and going to miss the 53-man roster because he's hurt, I think they need another offensive tackle and one who's not currently on the roster. I don't think they're going to keep Aviante Collins in his place, and I think they need someone beyond Karan Amagaji, at least at first. I just don't think, if you're playing the Titans and in the second quarter, Braxton Jones' ankle gets rolled up on, Karan Amagaji is not ready to go into an NFL regular season game and not crap his pants. It's just not realistic to expect him to be able to play a regular season NFL game with 0 preseason reps and very, very few training camp practice reps. It just doesn't seem, he's not going to be in game shape. He's not going to be in the playbook enough. You just can't rely on him to be that yet. But if Larry Borum's not going to be the guy, we talked about it, Jake Curhan isn't quite a swing tackle. Aviante Collins is, but he's a third string swing tackle. He just wasn't very good and hasn't been very good. I just don't think they're going to keep him in that spot. So an outside offensive tackle seems pretty likely to me. It wouldn't surprise me if an outside center guard was also brought in, because Ryan Bates is hurt. And if Ryan Bates is hurt, maybe you keep Doug Kramer as your third center. We didn't really talk about it when we went through that process. We don't know exactly how hurt Ryan Bates is, but it just feels to me the Bears are ripe to keep someone who could play center or someone who could play both offensive tackle spots, because injuries are challenging their depth of a player who can truly do those things. They've got guards. They've got plenty of options at guard. They're fine there. Matt Pryor, Jatari Carter, Bill Murray, they're not going to add just another pure guard, but someone who could play center or someone who could play both tackle spots seems like a strong possibility if a quality player hits the open market. I still think if a really good kick returner is out there, they'll bring one in. Okay, they've seen enough from Velus Jones, but everybody's messed up the punt returns, and Velus Jones muffed a kickoff return. Carter muffed a punt return. Dante Pettis ran backwards on a punt return. Maybe Pettis is their guy on the punts and they're comfortable with that, but I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if, say, Carter makes the 53 and then a better option comes available, you cut Carter and you sign that guy instead. That would not surprise me whatsoever on this Bears roster. And then, of course, it's the defensive line. Defensive tackle in particular is where the depth, I think, is most concerning there. I think they like the guys generally that they've had at defensive end between Booker and Robinson and Hardy. And it's not like a starter is really going to become available. It's a more of the end of the bench guy. But a defensive tackle, Billings, Dexter, Pickens, and then not much else. Byron Cowart has been your top defensive tackle option. It's a thing where I think Cowart makes the initial 53, and then a better defensive tackle gets cut somewhere else. They claim that guy on waivers, and then they cut Cowart after that, and that's your new number 4 defensive tackle instead of Byron Cowart, because there's just no experience and no proven production anywhere else on this defensive tackle depth chart, and the Bears are going to use those guys quite a bit and are going to need those guys to be important rotational pieces. You got to keep Gervon Dexter fresh. You got to keep Andrew Billings fresh, and Zach Pickens is hurt right now. We don't know whether Zach Pickens will be ready for week 1 or not. So they could even keep Cowart and add a 5th defensive tackle while Pickens is hurt, just to make sure you've got enough depth at that position. I mean, again, Walker will play some of that. Robinson will play some of that. Sweat can kick inside sometimes as well. They have some options there, but that to me feels like the most likely place is defensive line, in particular defensive tackle. But it wouldn't surprise me if they claimed a tackle and an end on waivers and maybe an offensive lineman. I would even say a 4th tight end could be a possibility there, just for some better depth there. But they're not going to claim a quarterback. They're not going to claim a running back. Probably not going to claim a wide receiver unless somebody they really love is out there. And most of the defensive back spots are pretty well taken care of too. Linebacker as well. It's really the trenches on both sides, and then maybe a tight end. But I do think the needs are big enough due to injuries on the offensive line and a lack of depth in the defensive line that both spots could very well be addressed with waiver wire pickups and free agent players that were cut from other teams' 90-man rosters that find a home in Chicago. Ryan Poles always seems to find 1 or 2 of those guys, and it could even come via a trade. We saw that last season with Dan Feeney. He traded a late-round pick for a guy who was going to be cut on another team's roster, but instead the Bears get a chance to go get him instead of having to compete for him on the open market, trade a late-round pick to make sure you get a guy that you really like. Don't be surprised if Ryan Poles swings a very minor trade over the weekend. Not a Matthew Judon, Hassan Reddick level trade, but more like a Khalid Kareem, or I just said his name, I can't think of it, a Dan Feeney level trade to get somebody else in on this 53-man roster. And they could also do the thing where if you want to put a guy on short-term injured reserve, he has to make your initial 53, and then you put him on injured reserve after that, and he can come back off. So Larry Borum, for example, could make the initial 53, then go on injured reserve, but he has to be on the initial 53 on Tuesday, but then you could clear up a roster spot by injured reserving him then, so then you can activate him again later in the season. They could do that with him. They could do that with Bates. Those seem like the most likely options there based on the injuries we know. I mean, maybe even Jacob Martin, the Colts pass rusher from the defensive end who hasn't played at all this preseason. And you can't rule out the idea that Karan Amagaji goes back on injured reserve. I mean, he's healthy now, but it's pretty easy to come up with an injury if you really want to stash a guy, and I could see them doing that with Karan. It's just, I mean, at this point, he's been healthy enough that they'll probably just roll with him, but don't rule it out as a possibility. Whatever big moves the Bears make on their roster, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're looking for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, where we look at the NFL from the league-wide perspective. I filled in as a host today with David Harrison. We talked about the Jahan Dotson trade from the Commanders to the Eagles, what that means for the Brandon Ayuk situation, if the Commanders are in play there, as well as the Falcons signing cornerback A.J. Terrell to a contract bigger than Jalen Johnson's. We scratched your head at how Terrell got more money than Jalen Johnson. So even a little bit of Bears talk for you on Locked On NFL. Find it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Come on back on Monday for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.